We've got the hallowed presence of our Port Chair, Alistair.
Thank you, Mr.
Our
Chairman.
HBRIC Chair, Chris. The Chief Executive of HBRIC, Blair. And
Some cat
esteemed
dragged in thingy from
Finance
well.
Manager from Port Kristen. So welcome, guys. Thank you very much for coming along. So just to help out the process, if you can give us your update on port activity, that would be fantastic. Then we'll go into public excluded, and I'm not sure whether I need a motion to invite you to attend the public excluded aspect of it. Probably do, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We're hoping that you stay around long enough to attend that part of the meeting. We'll then come out of public excluded and deal with the matter of the letter of expectation back to HBRIC, and you're most welcome to remain for that very important part of the meeting. So look, welcome Alistair, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Neil. Good morning, everyone. This is really an overview of the last financial year. So it's effectively the update that we gave at the annual general meeting, but there are some additional bits added to it. Kristen, as acting chief executive, is going to give the detail, but there are a few things I wanted to cover first.
You've already misplaced your chief executive. He's only just got there.
Yeah, no, he's busy. He's overseas at the moment. Is anyone else getting annoyed by that pinging in the background? Or?
Sure. Turn it down, Michael.
Is that any better?
How long have you been hearing this pinging?
I was just thinking, behave. So the previous financial year was notable for a number of things. The first was the impact of Kaikoura on Centreport and the consequent sudden mass increase of particularly container volume through the port. And it was also notable for the way in which the management and the staff stepped up and dealt with that. It was effectively a 6-year volume increase in the space of a month, and with no warning. So it was a magnificent response to a huge increase in volume. I also want to acknowledge the passing of John Shasky, who was a highly respected director of Napier Port until he had to resign through illness. John passed during the previous financial year, and I have to say that we have missed his presence over the last couple of years. He was a notable strategic thinker, and he understood the dairy industry better than probably anyone in New Zealand. So he is missed. Also want to acknowledge John Nichols, who retired after almost 10 years of exemplary service as a director, and for almost all of that he was chair of audit and risk. He was a fabulous backstop. He was a person that if John said the numbers were okay, they were okay. And having someone like that guarding the chairman's back is something that I have to say I really appreciate. And also in terms of notable exits, I need to acknowledge Garth Cowie, who was chief executive for over 17 years, and during that period led the port through 17 years of consecutive growth. It's a sensational achievement, but he will be remembered much, much more, not for the growth that he led, but for the passion and commitment to health and safety and the culture that he created at Napier Port, where health and safety is something that nobody takes for granted, and these things don't happen by chance. Garth did a sensational job leading that, and I do want to acknowledge that contribution. Of course, as these people move on, new people move in, and I would have loved to have introduced you all to our new chief executive, Todd Dawson. He's overseas at the moment, visiting customers in Asia. But Todd has already brought new insights, new ways of looking at the business, and just a completely different approach. So one of the first things he's had done is having the wall between his office and the rest of the office knocked down. So while he's away, that wall's been knocked down. He couldn't see any reason why a chief executive would hide in a corner. He wanted to be accessible to everyone in the business, and for him to be able to see and sense what's going on in the business without having to walk through two doors. So we will see a lot of change with Todd. His lens through which he views the world is through the eyes of the cargo owner, and that's going to be an interesting tweak to the way in which we view the world. And we also welcomed a new board member, Diana Pukitapu, who has come on board. She's had one meeting so far. She's a chartered member of the Institute of Directors and a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. So amazing governance experience, born in Napier, but from Napier background. So that's the high-level overview. I'm now going to hand over to Kristen to talk us through the detail.
Good morning, everybody. Just today, we'll run through basically some of the numbers in our results, talk briefly about some of the issues that we're dealing with, and a brief update on where we've got to, given that we're almost 6 months through into our new financial year. Basically, from a numbers perspective, our financial 17, which finished in September of last year, was an extraordinary year in terms of numbers. Total trade was up some 800,000 tonnes, or 21%. Within that, we had containerised cargo up a healthy 12%. You will be aware that we benefited from a lot of cargo coming up, redirected from Centreport because of the November 16 earthquake from the Kaikoura event. The Centreport container terminal was seriously damaged and basically out of operation. That recommenced in September last year, but in a sort of a piecemeal, impaired way, and they're looking to re-establish that. So one of the trends is we picked up, not all, but a good chunk of that during last year, and then some has remained and will remain, but not all. In terms of bulk cargo, up 23%. The big mover here again was logs, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And again, a good result in terms of vessel call. So records all around in terms of those numbers. In terms of how that translated into our financial results, we had a record revenue of just short of 87 million. Our expenses also went up as we dealt with, I guess, the sort of sudden influx of cargo. But translated into a again record net profit, up some 46% from the year before. We paid our largest dividend ever last year in terms of 10.7 million. We had another healthy year in terms of, when I say healthy, I mean a fairly large capex spend of close to 19 million. An ongoing trend, and our assets increased about 9% during the year. You've presumably seen this before, I imagine, most of you, in terms of this. I guess tells sort of the longer term story in terms of our containerised cargo flows. It's the red line's a rolling 12-month thing, and basically gives us the trends. If you kind of statistically drew a line through that, you'll see sort of a good steady growth story there in terms of containerised revenues. A little bit less clear, but you can see a bit of a spike across the 17 year as we picked up that additional cargo, and as the sort of dip right at the very right hand side suggests, that's effectively including the first quarter of this financial year, so up to December. That's now coming back as we were expecting. Logs is one of our I guess fastest changing or moving trades at the moment. As you can see in the graph, or the numbers might not be so clear, but so we did 1.6 million tonnes for 17. The year before that was about 1.2 million tonnes. That was a 35% increase. That's been steady for a while, and we've long talked about the wall of wood. And as far as we see, feel, experience, that is upon us. And I was going to mention later in the presentation, but our budget for this year was somewhere closer to 1.8 million tonnes, and what's actually coming across the wharves is probably going to get us closer to 2 million tonnes. So that's a 25% increase on a 35% increase, and our kind of longer term forecast had us peaking at around 3 million tonnes. I mean, that may differ depending on how the wood is shifted, harvested, etc. But so we've
Can you cope?
Sorry?
Can you cope with that?
We are endeavouring to do so. I guess one of the limitations with a fixed footprint, of course, is in terms of dealing with that, we either need to reallocate space from other operations or turn stock quicker, and we're certainly we don't totally control that, but we're contributing to incentivising that stock turn. I guess, to paraphrase, we're trying to reduce the sort of on-port storage factor and focusing on across the wharf services that we provide.
Can I just make a quick point about that? The increase in logs we're currently coping with, and we can, but the volume of shipping coming through is significantly up, and one of the challenges, and it'll come out later, but I do just want to draw attention to it now, is the fact that with bigger container ships arriving, and we've got two different vessels that are both over 40 metres wide. Our biggest previously was 32.2. So we have very, very significantly wider ships coming in. In order to get them in safely, we have to clear two other wharves. Same with bringing cruise ships in. The really big ones, we have to pretty well clear the port. So in terms of dealing with the wall of wood, by itself it's not a problem, but when you combine it with bigger ships, both container ships and bigger cruise ships, it's a juggling act that is now significant. We're having to move ships significantly more this year than we did in previous years in order to enable the bigger ships to get in.
Just in terms of other highlights or achievements for the year, we had 54 cruise ships in last year, so that was, I guess, a year ago. We, bringing in roughly 125,000 passengers and crews, which is obviously great for the region. Just out of interest, we've got 60 cruise ships booked for this year, and I think the number for next year already is closer to 69, I think it is. So that's another, I guess, segment of our business which is doing incredibly well, and we're seeing that in terms of cruise, the ship vessels and people coming through the port.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
What's the sort of the relative value of cruise ship business compared to cargo business? I mean, if push came to shove.
In terms of revenue streams to the port?
Yeah, I mean.
Well, it's minor compared to all other revenue streams, but it's in the millions.
Does it impede other growth in other areas?
Well, I mean, it's more about the utilisation of berth capacity. So, quite frankly, we have, as Alistair was alluding to, we're moving ships around all the time to manage to manage the whole. So we have log vessels moving when container ships come in. We have cruise ships causing container ships and log vessels to move. We have all sorts of.
I guess my question is: will there ever be too many cruise ships?
Can I come back to you when that's a problem?
So two quick things on that. One is Six Wharf will make a significant difference in terms of being able to handle ships at the same time, and particularly the bigger ships. But the other is that the cruise, while it's a relatively small revenue impact for the port, it has a massive economic benefit to the region. So we do have to think about both sides of that.
And specifically Ovation Seas, which till now has been the largest cruise ship calling in New Zealand. We were able to birth that, and I guess if you follow the press, you would know that like Auckland can't, and things like that. So we're a proud moment from a marine perspective. In terms of community, we've been quite active, particularly in regards to our resource consent consultations. It's a piece of work that we've been working on for over 18 months, and I think we talked to over 2,000 different voices or stakeholders in the community. In addition to that, we came to a settlement with our neighbours, or offered a settlement or a package to enhance, I guess, noise mitigation, things on a proactive basis, and that seems to be progressing well. Just in terms of, I guess, current issues and things that we're planning for or dealing with. As I mentioned, the Wall of Wood is well underway. Growth in containerised cargo, as that graph suggested earlier, that's an ongoing trend, and that's one of the, I guess, the key sort of tenets in our discussion around the new berth requirements in terms of being able to handle that cargo going forward into the decades to come. Growing tourism, bigger ships, as Alistair referred to, an ongoing, I guess, topic of discussion in sort of New Zealand port sector and logistics sector around bigger ships. In the sort of, I guess, the last year, some bigger ships, not big ships, have called up in Tauranga. So they're sort of calling on New Zealand shores now, and I guess we don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but the expectation is that eventually that cascading of the bigger ships through the global trade lines will continue to come to New Zealand, back New Zealand. We, as part of our wharf development engagement and sort of the planning around that, we've been trying to highlight to the community around the effects of port traffic and the necessity to plan for that over the longer term. Just our own forecasts alone suggest a doubling in port traffic approximately over sort of the next 10-year period, let alone the next 40 to 50-year period. So we're particularly concerned about the Ahuriri bypass, given, I guess, the diversion of traffic to that direction. We're concerned if the port is doubling its volume in whatever 10, 20 years type thing, what that means in terms of port traffic and the effects of multi-use space through Ahuriri. So we're telling anyone who will listen that that is an issue and will continue to be an issue, and we need to plan accordingly. As mentioned, the resource consent that was for the sixth berth, together with dredging, was lodged in December of last year. So we're just working through, I guess, the paperwork on that in terms of final requests, which should be publicly notified not too far off. As we've discussed in the past, that's a sort of 125 million-ish type capex project. It gives us a berth and a channel, but not much else. And in the sort of bigger picture, the port has significant capital needs going beyond the berth looking forward. And as part of that, I guess, conversation, we're in discussions with our immediate shareholders and working with the council in terms of the exec team and others around the sort of options around funding that going forward.
What is the total fund? What is it? So 15 mil to do the channel, 125 mil to do the and gantry trains. What is it? It's all up.
So the 14.5 is meters. It's
Meters,
depth.
sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's meters.
Yeah.
Beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just got an M there.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, if you put gantry train, everything you want to do, what is it?
Everything we wanted to do, ignoring all other capex, is probably a number closer to 250, 300 million. And our current 10-year plan, which doesn't have all those extras, if you like, is about a 230 million, 250 million number.
Over a decade.
Over a
Of which
decade.
time you're going to double your income, double your throughput, not necessarily.
Not quite. No, we won't be doubling.
Well, that's what you said.
No, I
Potentially.
don't think so. No.
Doubling the traffic.
Traffic.
I mean, the nature of infrastructure projects is that you need to make big step ups. So the trade may do this steady growth, but we can't add a 2 metres of a wharf, we need to basically build a new wharf at a certain point. So we're trying to be proactive and plan ahead for that. We don't want to leave it to the last second, and we don't want to turn cargo away at the gates, basically. And that's basically the path we're working towards.
I'm conscious of your involvement in the reopening of the Napier Warrell rail line, but your engagement on port traffic. Are you engaging with your customers on increasing use of rail freight rather than putting stuff on the roads? I'm certainly about what's happening at Whakatū, and, for example, how Ravenstown has gone from putting stuff on rail and onto trucks. What other engagement are you making with your customers about trying to move stuff onto rail freight?
Well, I mean, we're in constant, I guess, communication with our customers. I mean, I'm not privy to those conversations, so I don't know if that's specifically on the agenda. But in terms of longer term planning, we're doing our own, I guess, rail studies and preliminary discussions around the appetites and I guess the modes, potential modes of transportation between Whakatū and the port in terms of our next phase of growth. So we're I guess doing some actions, but in terms of more detail on that, sorry,
We've also had reasonably productive discussions with Kiwi Rail, particularly in the context of Whakatū. We've got to the stage of looking at whether it's even remotely feasible to double stack the containers and bring them in too high on the trains. Trains aren't a panacea to everything in Napier because there are, I think, 22 level crossings through town. I can't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me, but it's about that. So they're a significant disruptor.
So traffic lights tell us that.
I absolutely agree. There's no easy answer to this, is I guess the point. We're looking at every option.
Yep.
I'm really interested in that, in the growth. The wall of wood, as we will refer to. Have you got a graph which shows that? Because we've heard from the forestry people that it could go up 5 times. Is that
5 times?
The volume? So there is actually a wall. Is it? Do you expect it to double or?
So we expect it to
10
peak
in a
around
decade?
3 million tonnes, probably in about, I think from memory, it's about 5 years from now.
That should double.
That was our base case forecast, and that's some just conversations with the forest owners, the exporters, and others in the industry. And that's basically what we projected. But I mean, again, the cuts actually might be smoother potentially. So it's roughly that. So we're going from 1.1 million tonnes 2 or 3 years ago to 3 million tonne roughly peak. There's obviously a lot of wood up the east coast, so if some of that wood can't get out other ports and things, then I guess it could get more pronounced potentially.
But in terms of the detail, for the planning purposes, every single woodlot owner is on a database, and the commercial guys have talked to them in terms of the profile of the timber and the scheduling of the harvest. So I'd be genuinely astonished if we were that far out.
So doubling in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's not as big as some people have predicted, but it's big. I mean,
Again, yeah,
but not 5 times.
Some of you may have seen this before, and this is, I guess, a reflection on what's happening in global shipping. Our biggest customers are shipping lines, global shipping lines. And I guess the point is here that the industry's been hemorrhaging cash, making significant losses, and suffering from massive overcapacity. So everybody's trying to build the biggest and best massive big container ships in the sort of global supply sense. Those ships are then displacing other ships, which then's moving out. But effectively, most of the shipping lines are either losing money or barely making money, and then probably next quarter will lose money. And what that's having is in a competitive situation is a lot of the shipping lines are dealing with that by mergers and alliances. And what we've seen is a effectively collapsing of the number of competitors in the space, and that's continuing to happen. Ongoing conversations now, and I suppose the biggest one to draw your attention to would be the acquisition by Maersk on the right-hand side there of Hamburg Süd. They are our two biggest shipping line customers. So aggregated sense, I don't know the exact number, but it's a significant portion of our revenue. And I guess the point to make here, as they aggregate and become fewer, the competitive tensions, if you like, will weaken and potentially start to impact, I guess, our ability to negotiate in terms of, at the moment, I wouldn't say we're price takers, if you like, but if the situation was to arise where there was only a very small group of shipping lines choosing to call in Napier, as they choose to call, then that may have implications for our, I guess, ability to price and recover capital and other, I guess, sort of consequences of that. So that's something we're monitoring very closely, and sort of point of constant discussion.
Sorry, Chair, is that an issue that's connected with your vision, well, why you feel that you need to have Port 6? Is this amalgamation of the shipping companies that are going to be dictating more in terms of what the size of the ships they're going to be bringing in?
Not specifically or not directly. We haven't made that direct connection.
Right.
I mean, I guess the sort of mantra that we say is that the shipping lines tend to follow the cargo. So we would expect, as the cargo grows, to have at least sort of a similar number of vessels calling, because at the moment they work in alliances, but they're kind of more commercial alliances rather than, you know, amalgamations and corporate alliances.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think so.
But the bigger ships are coming. I mean, we're already seeing it. So a year ago, I wouldn't have believed that we could handle a 40-metre wide ship on 5 berth. The challenge we've got is that the wharf face won't take too much direct load, and our cranes have big outriggers that obviously they need to get very near the edge of the wharf to be able to reach right across a big ship. And the hatch lids are the heaviest thing to lift off the ship, so we've had to work out new ways of configuring it to get hatch lids off a 40-metre wide ship, but we're doing it. But we're going to get more of them, and we're going to get forced into a bigger berth at some point, whether we like it or not.
Okay,
if we're going to stay relevant.
Yeah, it's just that one of the questions I get asked about this whole capital thing going on is around why do we actually need Wharf 6 in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's been particularly well articulated yet. I assume that it's going to be, but just to let you know that will be one question that will be asked quite frequently, and we need to have the answers for that rather than just the assurances of the directors.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest possible terms, if we want to stay sustainably relevant, we need a bigger wharf.
Yeah.
So it's as simple as that.
I guess the last point to make in relation. Sorry.
No, you're saying the competitive balance will alter with these mergers, and there'll be pressure on your ability to charge. Do you think those bigger ships will affect the container prices? I mean, I'm talking about now because container prices have halved in this competitive environment. I think it's about half too, isn't it? Well, in my day, it was a whole lot more than it is now. Do you think that could stay low, or do you think that could go up?
Only one direction it's going, Rick.
Well, but big ships are going to be more efficient. Could that be argued?
Why would the shipping lines share?
Well, that's the issue, isn't it?
There are two issues here. One is the size of the ship, but the other is the size of the merged entity that owns it.
And their grant.
And when you've only got 5 players as opposed to 15, there's only one way price is going to go, and it's unsustainably low now, so it's going to go up. Big ships are only economical when they're full, so they don't make much sense any other time.
Yeah. So that was my last point. I was basically going to say that the trade should be bracing itself for the only way is up, effectively, in terms of rates.
Well, I had a great run.
Yeah, and still benefiting. So just in terms of current year, we're forecasting, as alluded to earlier, in terms of reduction from last year in terms of container trades, as Centreport's back up and running. Also, as mentioned, log exports are humming, growing very strongly. Just to state the obvious, in terms of the pit fruit season's now underway, and we're fully operational in that sense, in terms of we've geared up for that and managing to date, if you like, all the truck turns and other things, and in terms of dedicated lanes and other things that we've put on for them. Just in terms of expectations, overall earnings and profit will be down from last year. And in terms of another subject that came up during last year, you may be aware of, we had some issues with insurance, again as a byproduct of two port earthquake events, or two earthquake events that affected ports materially in New Zealand. Basically what we found is that the insurance community had significally reduced appetite for taking on seismic natural disaster risks, including our main New Zealand Ports Collective insurer withdrew on us pretty late in the piece, so we, with our brokers, had to find another lead. We ended up having to place a lot more insurance in Lloyd's, in global markets, and quite frankly, when come the 1st of July, we couldn't actually get the insurance that we wanted. We'd only get half. We had to sort of moved as quick as we could to try to cover that gap, and we did by, I think, the end of August. One of the consequences of that was cost and significant increase in insurance costs, which you may have heard or be aware that we've passed on as a cost recovery levy to our trade as a means of covering that. We're in the process of doing the exercise again for this year, and I guess the early feedback is not good in terms of continued pressures and lack of appetite, and price probably looks like it's going up rather than down. Anyway, that's my problem, not yours, but just to note, I guess, in terms of that remains an issue for us. That's all I had prepared. Happy to take any more questions.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Alistair. Now, are there any further questions that Debbie, did you have something? Anyone else got any issues that you want to pose now? We've got opportunities as we go anyway, but look, thank you very much. I think that's very useful for councillors to have the engagement, and I suspect that as we go forward, we're probably on the cusp of major activity in terms of both your side and ours in terms of the future, and I suspect that we're going to have a very close relationship over the next couple of years that invites a regular discussion between council and with our key strategic investments. So we look forward to seeing your smiling faces going forward. I would comment that before you arrived, that we'd had an analysis of the governance structures of the American port system, and we've come to a conclusion that we might need to mirror that with socialists and hippies being recruited to operate the ports. So,
Nothing wrong with hippies.
Chair, I'd just like to make a comment too. If you, I think you guys have done a fantastic job, Alistair. I think you've done a magnificent job as chair and your team of governors. I mean, don't look at many results like that. Up 6%, up 10%, up 13%, in every single indicator. So, no matter what people may think of the little squabbles that are occurring out there, because they always do occur, you guys have done a fantastic job. So,
Thank you.
you should thank yourselves.
Let's see if you can do it again.
We're trying to condition you that we can't be.
Look, we're up to the point of the meeting where we're needing to go into public excluded, and there are two motions that we need to consider. The first is that we do go into public excluded, And the second is that we invite the 5 gentlemen in front of us to attend that. So can I have a mover
I'll move
that
that.
we go into public excluded, and with
And,
the
we invite these guys
with the
to stay.
presence of the folk here. Have I got a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. All those in favour of that recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. So we'll now move into